He slapped her across the face in front of 200 people, and she was 6 months pregnant with his child. The sound was flat and final, the way a door sounds when it locks from the outside. One open hand, one motion, and then Carter Whitmore III straightened his jacket, turned back to the podium, and continued his speech about legacy. The room did not move. 200 of Houston's most powerful people, investors, executives, board members in black tie, stood holding their drinks in a ballroom that cost $40,000 to rent for the evening, and not one of them made a sound. Diane Whitmore, Carter's mother, stood near the stage in an ivory column dress, her expression unreadable, her champagne flute perfectly level. Rebecca Lane, Carter's lobbyist and the woman whose photograph lived on his second phone, watched from a table near the back and looked quickly away. And Priya Anand Whitmore, 6 months pregnant, wearing a dress Diane had called too simple for a room like this, stood exactly where she had been standing and did not cry, and did not leave, and did not say a single word. What nobody in that ballroom could have known, what Carter had never once thought to check, was that the woman he had just struck in front of his investors was the majority owner of his company. Every share, every mineral field, every barrel his grandfather ever claimed hers, held quietly, legally, invisibly, through a $1.17 trillion private trust her father built before Carter ever knew her name. This isn't just a story about a man who humiliated his wife. It's about what happens when the most powerful person in the room has spent 2 years letting you believe she was the least. If you believe that quiet strength is still strength, give this video a like and subscribe. This channel is built for people who understand that. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from tonight. To understand what Priya did next and why she was ready, we need to go back to where this story really began. The story began, as so many do, not with a lie, but with a careful silence. The year was 1982, and Rajan Anand was 26 years old when he landed in Houston with an engineering degree from IIT Madras, $40 folded into a money belt beneath his shirt, and a quality that would take the people around him decades to properly identify. He was not charming. He was not loud. He did not arrive with a vision he announced or a dream he performed for anyone who would listen. He arrived with a methodology, and he went to work. His first acquisition was a parcel of mineral rights in the Permian Basin, 4,200 acres in Midland County, that 3 other buyers had passed on because the surface geology was inconclusive. And the seller was asking what seemed, in 1983, like an unreasonable price. Rajan paid it. He did not explain why to anyone. He simply paid it, filed the paperwork under Anand Holdings LLC, and returned to his rented apartment in Southwest Houston, where he kept a legal pad on the kitchen table and updated it every Sunday evening with numbers no one else ever saw. That was how he built everything. Quietly, precisely, one acquisition filed, one column updated, one Sunday at a time. By 2003, Rajan Anand was worth considerably more than the people around him understood, which was exactly how he preferred it. That year, Whitmore Energy Group, the storied Texas oil company built on James Whitmore Sr.'s cattle land and his son's leveraged ambition, was over-leveraged and quietly desperate for capital. Carter Whitmore II, Carter III's father, needed a cash injection that his bank would not provide, and his pride would not let him request publicly. A representative of a private investment vehicle called Meridian Basin Partners approached him with an offer. The terms were favorable. The capital was clean. Clear's throat. Carter II signed without asking who, ultimately, stood behind Meridian Basin Partners. He saw no reason to look. The money was real, and the problem was solved, and that was enough. Meridian Basin Partners was one of 7 shell entities Rajan Anand maintained for exactly this kind of moment. By 2014, through a sequence of secondary acquisitions so carefully structured that no single transaction triggered a disclosure threshold, Rajan held 54% of Whitmore Energy Group. He never introduced himself to the Whitmore family. He never attended a shareholder event. He simply held the position, updated his legal pad on Sunday evenings, and said nothing. His daughter knew. She had known since she was 17 when Rajan sat her down at the kitchen table, pushed the legal pad across to her, and said, "You should understand what we hold." He did not say it with pride. He said it the way an engineer reviews load-bearing specifications, because accuracy matters and someone needs to know. Priya read every line. She asked 2 questions. Both technical, both correct. Her father looked at her for a long moment and then said, for the first time, the thing he would say to her many times after: never show the whole hand. Let them underestimate the cards. She was 14 the first time she watched him apply that principle in a room full of people who believed they had the advantage. A memory surfaced, sharp and specific, across the distance of 20 years. The conference room was on the 32nd floor of a building on Westheimer Road. Rajan sat across from three men in suits who had been speaking for 40 minutes, each one more certain than the last that they understood his position and his ceiling. They quoted numbers back at him that were significantly lower than what he knew the asset was worth. They smiled with the particular patience of people who believed they were explaining something to someone who doesn't fully understand it. Rajan listened. He did not interrupt. He did not shift in his chair. His hands rested flat on the table, still invisible, the way they always were. When the third man finished, Rajan waited 4 full seconds. Priya counted from her chair against the wall where she'd been told to sit quietly. And then he placed a single sheet of paper on the table, face up, and slid it across. The room changed. Not loudly, not dramatically. It changed the way a room changes when someone finally turns on the light. A quiet, irreversible shift in what could be seen and what could not be unseen. The number on that sheet of paper was not what they expected. The documentation behind it was not what they had anticipated. The meeting, which had been scheduled for 2 hours, ended in 12 minutes. The men in suits left first. Rajan gathered his papers without hurrying, slid them into his briefcase, and held the elevator door for his daughter. "That's it?" Priya asked on the way down. "That's it," he said. She understood, even at 14, that she had not watched a negotiation. She had watched its conclusion. Everything before had simply been the other side, not yet knowing the meeting was already over. Rajan Anand constructed legal protections around his daughter with the same precision he applied to every other structure he built. The Anand Family Trust, Asset Code ACP, PRW-01, was established in 2009 under Texas Property Code and structured specifically as Priya's separate property, predating any future marriage, insulated from any future claim, managed by his attorney of 17 years, Meera Shah, whose offices on McKinney Avenue in Midtown Houston occupied a floor that said simply, Shah and Associates on the directory, and nothing else. Meera was not a warm woman. She was a precise one, which Rajan considered the more durable quality. When Priya enrolled at the University of Texas in 2006 and declared petroleum engineering, Rajan said nothing beyond a single nod that she correctly interpreted as the highest praise he offered. She graduated in 4 years with a focus on reservoir characterization. She understood what was beneath the ground before she understood what it meant to own it. She met Carter Whitmore III at an industry conference in Dallas in the autumn of her 32nd year. He was everything Rajan was not, which Priya initially mistook for balance. Carter filled a room effortlessly, broad-shouldered and certain, with the kind of easy authority that comes from never having doubted whether the room was his. He spoke about the industry with the confidence of someone who had grown up inside it, and he listened to Priya that first evening with what seemed like genuine attention, leaning forward when she spoke, asking follow-up questions that suggested he had actually heard her answers. He knew her father's name. He said it with respect, which moved her more than she later thought was wise. She liked his certainty. She did not yet understand that certainty and curiosity are different things, and that a man can have the first in abundance and almost none of the second. They were married 11 months later in a small ceremony in Houston. Rajan attended. He shook Carter's hand, looked at him for a moment with eyes that were reading something Carter could not see, and said, "Take care of what you've been given." Carter assumed he meant Priya. He was not wrong about that. He also did not understand that Rajan meant something else entirely. 3 months after the wedding, Rajan Anand had a stroke in his office on a Tuesday afternoon. He was found by his assistant at 4:30, still at his desk, the Sunday legal pad open in front of him. He died at Houston Methodist at 7:18 that evening. Priya was in the room. She held his hand. She did not cry until after, alone in the hospital parking structure with the engine running and the radio off, and even then, only briefly, because her father had not raised her to perform grief for anyone, including herself. The trust transferred to her in a single sealed document delivered by Meera Shah 6 days after the funeral. Priya sat at her father's desk and read every page. It took 4 hours. At the back of the document, tucked into the final envelope alongside the asset code index, was a business card, his original. Thin cardstock, slightly yellowed, a Chennai address that no longer existed, his name in plain black type. She turned it over. On the back in his handwriting were 4 words he had written himself at some point for some reason she could only guess at. Now that she could no longer ask him, not yet, but soon. She set it on the desk. She did not show it to Carter. She did not show it to anyone. She slid it into the interior pocket of her coat, where it would remain for the next 3 years, carried from room to room through the life she was still living, waiting for the moment those 4 words would change from a mystery into an instruction. She was not strategic about this. She was not calculating. She was simply a woman who had lost the most important person in her life and was not ready yet to know what came next. Carter did not know what she carried. He did not ask. He was, in those early months, still capable of kindness. The version of him Priya had chosen, still visible in the way he brought her tea when she was reading, in the way he made her laugh at dinners, in the way he reached for her hand in public as if it were a reflex he hadn't examined. He told people she was brilliant. He said it with pride. She did not yet know how briefly that would last. She knew only that she had been handed something irreplaceable and that she was not ready to use it. And so she waited. Not because her father had told her to, but because she understood in her own body, in the bone-deep way that grief teaches some things and only grief can, that the right moment was not yet, but it was coming. The erosion of a marriage rarely announces itself. It does not arrive with a declaration or a door slamming or a single terrible night that can be pointed to later as the moment everything changed. It arrives the way water damages a foundation, invisibly, incrementally, in the places no one thinks to look until the structure has already shifted. But that is getting ahead of things. To understand what Priya lost, you first have to understand what Carter was in the beginning, before the fear in him found its direction. He was, in those first 2 years, genuinely good at making her feel seen. That is the thing that is hardest to explain to people who only knew them later. Carter Whitmore, in the early version of himself, had a quality of attention that felt like sunlight. He asked questions and listened to the answers. At industry dinners in those first months, when Priya would make an observation about reservoir pressure or formation depth, he would lean in and say, "Tell them what you told me about the Midland Basin." And she would, and he would watch her with something that looked, at the time, entirely like pride. He introduced her to colleagues as the most technically fluent person in any room we walk into. He said it easily, without calculation. The way you say a thing you simply believe. She did not know yet that this version of Carter required a very specific condition to exist. He needed to feel, on some level, that he was still ahead of her. The moment that stopped being true, the attention curdled into something else entirely. But that came later. The first dinner where it went wrong was in March of their second year. They were seated across from 2 executives from a pipeline development firm, and the conversation turned to shale extraction methodology in the Delaware Basin. Priya said something precise and technically accurate about lateral well spacing that caused one of the executives to stop mid-sentence and say, "Where did you study?" Carter laughed. "She just reads a lot," he said, and steered the conversation elsewhere. Priya did not correct him. She reached for her water glass and found that her hand was steadier than she expected. She told herself it was a small thing. She would tell herself that for the next 2 years. Diane Whitmore entered the picture gradually, the way all the most effective damage does. She was Carter's mother in the way that certain women are their sons' mothers, completely, structurally, as though the relationship were an executive function she had been appointed to for life. She arrived at their home on Inwood Road for Sunday lunches with the energy of someone conducting a wellness inspection, her gaze moving across rooms and surfaces, and Priya's appearance with the practiced neutrality of a woman who had learned to deliver assessments without technically making them. "That color is interesting on you," she said once, of a deep blue dress Priya had worn to a dinner. The pause before interesting lasted exactly long enough. She began calling Priya Carter's international project. Not to Priya's face, never that directly, but to friends, to women in her social circle, to her sister in a phone call that a mutual acquaintance overheard at a luncheon and relayed to Priya 3 weeks later with the specific discomfort of someone who isn't sure whether to have said anything at all. Priya thanked her and changed the subject. She did not tell Carter. She did not tell Mira. She filed it away in the part of herself that was still watching and waiting and saying nothing. When Priya's pregnancy was confirmed in the autumn of that third year, Diane arrived at the house the following Sunday with a gift bag and a smile that did not reach her eyes and said, at the lunch table, in a voice arranged carefully around concern, "We're all just hoping the baby takes after Carter's side in terms of drive and focus. Not that Priya isn't lovely. She's just well." She gestured vaguely. Carter said nothing. Priya passed the bread. That was also the dinner at which Diane mentioned, entirely in passing, that she had called a law firm on McKinney Avenue to inquire about whether Carter had ever drawn up a prenuptial agreement before the wedding. She framed it as a practical concern. She said she just wanted to make sure the family's assets were properly protected. Carter nodded as though this were reasonable. Priya kept her face still. What Diane did not know, what she could not have known, was that the firm on McKinney Avenue was Shaw and Associates, that the receptionist who logged the call was named James Okafor, and that he noted the inquiry in the firm's client interaction record within the hour. That Mira Shah saw the notation before end of business that day and made a single phone call to Priya that evening. Diane Whitmore called the office, Mira said. She asked about a prenup. A pause. She doesn't know what we hold. Another pause. She won't find out from us. That was the entire conversation. Priya said thank you and hung up and stood in the kitchen for a long moment, with her hand flat on the counter, the baby pressing gently against her ribs, and something she could not name moving through her chest that was not quite relief and not quite satisfaction, and felt, if she was honest, a great deal like her father's hand resting still on a conference table. The signs of Rebecca came slowly, and Priya did not see them all at once. She was not looking for them. That is the truth that the story requires her to have, and it is genuinely true. She was not the kind of woman who checked phones, or tracked movements, or mapped the geography of her husband's absences against a suspicion. She was pregnant and tired and still grieving a father she had not finished grieving, and she extended the same patience to Carter's distance that she had extended to everything difficult in her life. She waited for it to resolve itself. The first sign was a name on a restaurant receipt, Chez Noose on Westheimer, a table for two on a Wednesday evening when Carter had said he was in Austin. Priya found the receipt in the breast pocket of a jacket she pulled from the dry cleaning bag. The name on the reservation, she could see it faintly in the carbon of the card slip, was Lane. She did not know Elaine. She put the receipt back. She said nothing. The second sign was a phone charger she did not recognize in the cup holder of Carter's car. Thinner than his, a different brand, a slightly different cable end. She noticed it when she moved it to sit down. She placed it back exactly where it had been. The third sign was the photograph. It was a Tuesday evening in November the 22nd, and Carter had left his phone on the kitchen island when he went upstairs to shower. It was not locked. She was not trying to look. She was reaching past it for the salt when the screen lit with a message notification, and she saw in the preview line a name, Rebecca, and below it 3 words she did not read because she did not need to. She picked up the phone. She found the photograph in under 4 seconds. Rebecca Lane was 38, polished, standing in what appeared to be the lobby of a hotel in Austin, with the ease of a woman who is very comfortable with where she is and who she is with. Priya studied the photograph for 6 seconds. Then she took a screenshot. Then she placed the phone back exactly where it had been, at exactly the angle it had been resting, and she went to the kitchen and filled the kettle and set it to boil. She made tea. She sat at the table. The baby moved once, a slow press against her left side, and she placed her hand there and held it still. That night after Carter had come back downstairs and eaten dinner and gone to his office and eventually come to bed, Priya lay awake in the dark and listened to him sleep. Then she picked up her own phone and typed a single message to Mira Shaw. "I think we're getting close." Mira's reply came at 6:17 the following morning. 4 words, "I'll send the observers." Carter did not know what was being assembled around him. He did not know that the quiet woman sleeping beside him, full with his child, her dark hair loose on the pillow, was not waiting passively for something to end. He did not know she had been watching and filing and holding for longer than he could have imagined. He did not know that patience in the hands of the right person is not the same thing as surrender. He would learn the difference, but not yet. She drove to the estate on Briarwood Lane, the way she had driven every road in her life that mattered, carefully with both hands on the wheel, her attention on what was directly in front of her, rather than on the things she was moving away from. The house was dark when she arrived. It was always dark when she arrived. She had maintained it for 3 years in exactly the condition her father had kept it. The exterior lights on a timer, the interior waiting, the rooms holding their particular quality of silence that was different from emptiness. Her father's silence had always had weight to it. Even now, 3 years after his death, she could feel it when she stepped through the door. Like a presence that had settled into the walls and simply stayed. She did not turn on many lights. She moved through the front hall and into the study, where his desk still sat at the same angle he had kept it, perpendicular to the window, so that the morning light would fall across whatever he was reading without creating glare. She sat in his chair. It was wooden, high-backed, brought from a craftsman in Chennai in 1994, and it was the least comfortable chair she had ever sat in and the most grounding. She had sat in it the night he died. She sat in it now. She did not touch her face. The left side of it had stiffened during the drive, a tight, warm pressure below her cheekbone that she was aware of the way. You're aware of a sound in another room, present, noted, not yet dealt with. She would deal with it later. There were things that needed to happen first. The baby moved, a slow, deliberate shift, the way her daughter had been moving for weeks now. Not the quick flutters of early months, but something more considered, as though she too was becoming certain of things. Priya placed one hand low on her rounded stomach and held it there and said nothing. The room was very quiet. She did not call Carter. There was nothing to say to Carter that had not already been said without words in that ballroom, by the photographer whose flash had fired on instinct, by the 2 representatives in the back of the room, whose names she knew and whose report was already being written. Everything that needed to be communicated to Carter would reach him through proper channels, in the proper sequence, at the proper time. Her father had taught her that the worst thing you could do after playing a card was explain it. She sat for a long time in the dark. At some point she reached into the inner pocket of her coat, the coat she had not yet taken off, the coat she had worn to a gala where her husband had struck her in front of 200 people, and she took out the business card. She did not need light to know what was on it. She knew both sides by now, the way you know the words of something you have read so many times it has stopped being reading and become something closer to breathing. His name on the front, the Chennai address, and on the back in his careful, angular handwriting, the 4 words he had left there for her. Not yet, but soon. She had found them 3 years ago and understood them as a mystery. She had carried them every day since and understood them as a promise. She sat with them now in the dark of his study, in his chair, in his house, and for the first time she understood them as a completion. The hand was full. It had been full for 3 years. She had been waiting, not strategically, not clear's throat calculatingly, but in the patient way her father had taught her to wait, which was not passive but attentive. The way you wait for a tide that you know is coming because you have read the water long enough to trust your own reading. The tide was here. The cards were on the table. All that remained was the gesture of laying them face up. She thought about the conference room on the 32nd floor of the building on Westheimer. She thought about the 3 men in suits in the 40 minutes they had spent being certain. She thought about her father's hands flat on the table, still visible, holding nothing that anyone in that room could see. She thought about the 12 minutes it had taken, once the single sheet of paper crossed the table, for everything to resolve. She had been 14 years old and she had watched from her chair against the wall, and she had counted the seconds of his silence before he moved. 4 seconds. She had thought at the time that the silence was patience. She understood now that it was timing. Something shifted in her, in that dark room, in that wooden chair. Not loudly, not with the drama of a door opening or a light switched on. It shifted the way something shifts when it has been almost ready for a very long time, and then becomes simply ready. She sat straighter. Her shoulders settled. Her breathing slowed and deepened and found a rhythm that had nothing strained in it. She was not trembling. She had not been trembling since she walked out of that ballroom 3 hours ago, and she would not tremble again in any room that contained the people who had believed she would. At 6 in the morning, when the sky outside the study window had begun its transition from black to the particular blue-gray of a Houston dawn, Priya picked up her phone. She found Mira Shaw's number. She pressed call. Mira answered on the second ring, which told Priya that Mira had been awake. "Withdraw the investment," Priya said. "All of it, and file the equity disclosure." A brief pause. "The board meeting? When?" "Tomorrow if possible. The day after at the latest." "Understood." Another pause, shorter. "He hit you in front of the observers." "Yes? I know, I have the photographs." The line was quiet for a moment. Then Mira said, 14 of them. Sequential, time-stamped. Priya said, "Good." She ended the call. She set the phone on her father's desk. On the wooden surface, he had kept clear of everything except what was currently necessary. She placed the business card beside it. She looked at the window. The sky was going light. Across the city on the 14th floor of a building on Post Oak Boulevard, Carter Whitmore's phone was lighting up on his bedside table with a missed call from his chief financial officer. He would see it in 40 minutes when he woke. He would call back immediately. He would spend the next several hours trying to understand something that had already been decided by a woman sitting quietly in her father's chair, watching the sun come up over Houston with the particular stillness of someone who has just placed the last card on the table and is waiting without urgency for the room to catch up. Carter Whitmore's phone rang at 9:14 on a Thursday morning, and the voice on the other end belonged to his chief financial officer, Marcus Delgado, who was not a man given to panic. That was the first thing Carter noticed, not the words, the register. Marcus spoke in the flattened, carefully controlled tone of someone delivering information that he himself had not yet fully processed. Anand Capital Partners had withdrawn their bridge investment, all of it, effective immediately. $9.3 billion gone from the refinancing structure before the markets opened, with a single line of explanation in the withdrawal notice. Undisclosed conflict of interest. Carter spent 4 hours on the phone. He called the Anand Capital main line, the investor relations desk, two personal contacts he believed he had cultivated over 18 months of careful relationship management. He was transferred. He was placed on hold. He was told twice that the account manager was unavailable. At 1:14 in the afternoon, a junior associate named Daniel Yu, who sounded approximately 26 years old and deeply uncomfortable, told Carter that the withdrawal had been authorized by the account's controlling signatory and that Carter would need to direct any further inquiries to that signatory's legal representation. Carter asked for the name. There was a pause on the line that lasted 3 full seconds. "Priya Anand Whitmore," Daniel Yu said. Carter did not respond immediately. He sat at his desk on the 14th floor of the Whitmore Energy Building on Post Oak Boulevard and looked at nothing in particular for a long moment. Then he said he would call back. He did not call back. He sat without moving until his attorney, Gregory Holt, called at 2:45 with the second piece. A notice of equity disclosure had been filed with the company's board. A formal meeting had been scheduled for the following afternoon at 2 on our key. Attendance was not optional. The board convened in the main conference room on the 16th floor, a room with floor-to-ceiling windows on the west side, a long table of polished walnut, and 12 leather chairs that had always, in Carter's understanding, arranged themselves around his authority. He arrived at 1:50 with Gregory Holt and 2 junior associates. Diane was already there, seated 2 chairs from the head, her posture immaculate, her expression controlled in the way of someone who has chosen control specifically because the alternative frightens her. The 7 remaining board members filed in and found their seats. The room had the particular quality of tension that comes from a group of people who all know something significant is about to happen and have agreed, without speaking, not to say so aloud. At 2:01 exactly, the conference room door opened. Priya walked in first. She wore a charcoal blazer over a dark dress, her dark hair pulled simply back, and she moved with the unhurried steadiness of someone who has already decided every question in the room. 7 months pregnant, she carried herself with a composure so complete it registered as its own kind of authority. Mira Shah followed one step behind, a leather document case under her arm, her expression professionally neutral. Priya crossed to the head of the table, the chair Carter had always occupied, and sat down. She placed both hands flat on the walnut surface. She did not look at Carter immediately. She looked at the board. Carter stared at her. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. Mira set the document case on the table and opened it without ceremony. I'll be presenting on behalf of Priya Anand Whitmore, sole heir and controlling trustee of the Anand Family Trust. Asset code ACP-PRW-01, Mira said. Her voice was level and caring. I'll ask that questions be held until the presentation is complete. The first document went down the center of the table. It was dated October the 2nd, 2003. Mira explained it without embellishment. The initial acquisition executed through Meridian Basin Partners, LLC, a private vehicle established for the specific purpose. 8% of Whitmore Energy Group purchased at a time when the company's debt-to-equity ratio had made it vulnerable to quiet capital. The board members leaned forward. Carter's jaw tightened. The second document followed, 2007. Another clears throat acquisition vehicle, another tranche. Then 2011, then 2014, then 2019, when Rajan Anand's total holding crossed the 54% threshold and he became, without announcement or introduction, the majority owner of a company whose CEO had no idea he existed. Mira placed each document on the table with the same measured pace, the same flat authority, letting the numbers accumulate the way water accumulates, steadily, without drama, until the weight of it was undeniable. The room was very quiet. Carter's attorney leaned in and said something low near his ear. Carter did not appear to hear it. His eyes were on the documents moving down the table toward him, each one a year of his professional life reframed without his permission. The third section, the Anand Family Trust in full, established 2009. Total current valuation, $1.17 trillion. Holdings, including mineral rights across 47 properties in the Permian Basin, the Gulf Coast Shelf, and 3 international licensing agreements. And at the center of it, the controlling 54% equity stake in Whitmore Energy Group, transferred in its entirety to Priya Anand Whitmore upon Rajan Anand's death in 2021, 2 years ago, while Priya had been attending Carter's industry dinners and passing the bread at Sunday lunches, and accepting, without comment, her removal from the household accounts. Mira paused. She reached into the document case a final time. The last item, she said, is provided as context for the board's assessment of conduct. She placed a printed photograph on the table, then another, then 12 more in sequence, face up, each one time-stamped in the lower right corner. 14 images from a ballroom on a Friday evening, taken by a photographer whose flash had fired on instinct and whose camera had kept firing for the 6 seconds that followed. They showed in clear sequential detail Carter Whitmore III gripping his pregnant wife's wrist, pulling her toward him, and striking her across the face. They showed the room's stillness. They showed Carter straightening his jacket. And in 3 of the 14 images visible in the background near the east wall were 2 individuals wearing Anand Capital Partners name tags who had been dispatched to that event specifically because Mira Shah had understood, with the patience of a woman who had worked for Rajan Anand for 22 years, the documentation requires witnesses. Diane Whitmore's hand moved to her throat. It moved slowly, the way hands move when the body is processing something the mind is refusing. Gregory Holt stopped whispering. He set down his pen. The Clear's throat board did not speak. 7 people looked at 14 photographs and arrived without conference at the same understanding. Carter looked up from the photographs. He looked at Priya, and for a single moment, brief and unmistakable, and entirely without defense, his face showed not anger, but recognition. The specific, devastating recognition of a man who understands, in a single instant, the full shape of what he did not know. She had been there the entire time, in his company, in his home, at his table, and she had said nothing. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she had understood, in a way he never had, exactly when to speak. Priya looked back at him. Her expression was the same one she had worn at 100 of his dinners. Calm, present, complete. You told 200 people, she said, that I just wear the jewelry. She closed the folder in front of her. She did not say anything else. The board chairman, Robert Ainsworth, cleared his throat. He called for a motion. The vote took 4 minutes. 9 in favor, 1 opposed. Carter's own cast in a silence so absolute it was almost dignified. 2 abstentions from members who did not yet have attorneys present, but understood they shortly would. Priya stood. She thanked the board by name, moving through each of them with the unhurried courtesy of someone with nowhere to be but here. She picked up the business card she had placed without comment on the table beside her folder when she sat down. Thin cardstock, a Chennai address, 4 words on the back that no one else in the room would ever read. She slid it into her jacket pocket. Then she walked to the door and Meera Shah fell into step beside her, and neither of them looked back. The door closed with a sound that was very soft and very final. Behind it, the consequences were already arriving. They could not be stopped. They had in truth been arriving for 3 years, moving quietly, precisely, the way everything Rajan Anand had ever built moved, right up until the moment it was time for the room to know. The consequences arrived the way fully prepared consequences always do, not with noise, but with the quiet efficiency of something that has been in motion for a long time and has simply finally reached its destination. Carter's termination as CEO of Whitmore Energy Group was formalized at 9 on the Saturday morning, following the board meeting, 43 hours after the vote. The letter was delivered by courier to the Inwood Roadhouse. Priya was not there to see him receive it. She had not been there since the night of the gala. The house on Inwood Road was Carter's now, in the way that things belong to people who are left alone in them. And Carter moved through it in the days that followed, the way a man moves through a space he no longer recognizes, slowly, without direction, picking up objects and setting them back down. The refinancing collapsed on the Tuesday. Without the Anand Capital Bridge investment, the structure that Gregory Holt had spent 14 months assembling had no center to hold it. 3 partner banks withdrew within 72 hours of the board meeting's outcome becoming known, which in the energy corridor of Houston happened faster than Carter had believed possible. He had 4 calls with Gregory Holt that week. Each one was shorter than the last. Rebecca Lane's statement was issued on the Wednesday through her attorney, a woman named Patricia Solis, whose firm was based in Austin, and who was, by all accounts, very good at her job. The statement was 4 sentences. It described Rebecca's decision to sever all personal ties with Carter Whitmore, cited concerns about his conduct and character, and concluded that she wished him well in his private matters. It was the kind of statement written by someone who had already moved on before she wrote it, and was simply completing the administrative requirement of saying so. Carter did not respond publicly. There was nothing to respond to. Diane Whitmore left 3 voicemails on Priya's phone across the course of that same week. The first was composed and formal, a request for a conversation at Priya's convenience. The second was slightly less composed, the architecture of her diction showing small cracks at the edges. A longer pause before certain words, a sentence that restarted itself. The third was quiet in a way Diane had never been quiet in anything Priya had witnessed. Priya sat in her father's study and listened to all 3. The phone held loosely in her hand, her expression unchanged. Then she set the phone on the desk and did not call back. There was nothing Diane could say now that would require a response. The conversation Diane had wanted to have for 4 years had concluded in a conference room on the 16th floor of a building on Post Oak Boulevard, and Priya had said everything she needed to say. Carter came to the estate on a Thursday afternoon. He had found the address. Priya did not know how, and it did not matter. He rang the bell at the front gate. Meera Shah's assistant, a young woman named Kezia Omondi, who worked from the estate 2 days a week during the transition period, answered the intercom. She told Carter that Miss Anand was unavailable. Carter asked for how long. Kezia said she wasn't able to say. Carter sat in his car outside the gate for 11 minutes before he drove away. Priya was in the study when it happened. She heard none of it. She was reading the quarterly asset summary Meera had prepared, making notes in the margin in her father's mechanical pencil, which she had found in his desk drawer, and which still held the same lid he had loaded into it. The Anand Capital Bridge investment was reinstated 2 weeks after the board meeting, restructured entirely on Priya's terms, and administered through a new operational agreement that Meera had been drafting since the morning after the gala. A new executive leadership team for Whitmore Energy was selected over the course of 10 days. a process Priya conducted from her father's desk in consultation with Mira and two independent advisors whose names she had chosen herself. Whitmore Energy did not change its name. She had considered it briefly and decided against it. The name was not the problem. The name was simply a name. What mattered was whose name sat at the top of the equity register, and that had always been hers. The scene softened into something quieter in the weeks that followed. Priya's daughter was born on a Sunday morning at Houston Methodist, 3 weeks after the board meeting and 11 days after Priya moved permanently into the estate on Briarwood Lane. The labor was long and the morning was gray, and the nurse who placed the baby on Priya's chest was named Angela Morris, who said nothing beyond what was necessary because she had the gift of understanding when silence was the right medicine. Priya held her daughter for a long time without speaking. The baby was healthy and loud and small in a way that felt to Priya like the most precise possible answer to a question she had not known how to ask. She named her Rhea. It was not a compromise or a tribute or a statement. It was simply the name that felt true. 3 weeks after that, on an early morning in spring, when the Houston sky was doing its particular thing with light, spreading it thin and pale and enormous across everything, the way it does in that city in the hour before the heat arrives, Priya carried her daughter out to the back porch of Raj Anand's estate and sat down in the wooden chair her father had brought from Chennai, the chair that had held her through grief and through waiting and through the long middle distance between not yet and now. She settled Rhea against her chest, one hand curved around the small warm weight of her, and with her free hand, she reached into the pocket of her robe and took out the business card. She did not need to read it. She turned it over anyway. The way you turn over something precious, not because you have forgotten what is written on it, but because the act of turning it is its own kind of language. His handwriting, 4 words. The thin cardstock worn slightly soft at the corners from 3 years of being carried and read and carried again. Not yet, but soon. Her father had understood something that the people who underestimated him never did, that the most powerful position in any room is the one that has not yet been revealed. That silence is not absence, that patience held long enough and honestly enough becomes its own form of truth. He had spent 40 years proving it without once explaining it, and he had left everything he built, every asset, every code, every document, every carefully structured protection, to the daughter who understood him without needing the explanation. This is what it costs to be the person in the room that no one thinks to read. It costs years. It costs the particular exhaustion of being consistently underestimated by people you have chosen to love. It costs the discipline of holding everything you know in a stillness so complete that it reads to the wrong eyes as nothing at all. And it asks in return only this, that when the moment finally arrives, you are ready to place the card on the table with steady hands and a quiet voice, and nothing in your face that resembles anything other than the truth. Priya had been ready. She had not known for a long time when, but she had been ready. If Priya's story moved something in you, leave a comment below and tell us what it was. And if you're watching from somewhere in the world tonight, tell us where. This channel is built for people who understand that the most powerful person in any room is not always the loudest one. Priya pressed the business card once against her daughter's back. The way you press something you love against something else you love, just to feel both of them at once. Then she looked up at the pale Texas sky, which was enormous and indifferent and entirely, completely hers. "Now, Baba," she said very quietly. "Now."